In the quiet dawn of the medieval world, winter did not announce itself gently. It arrived like an invading army pressing against stone walls with frozen breath, where the land lay buried under snow, and the sky hung low and pale castles rose from the hills like ancient beasts, their towers rimed with ice, their gates sealed against a cold so severe it could still the blood. Yet within those walls life endured in warmth. It was not a miracle, but a hard-earned victory, carved from knowledge, patience, and survival as the wind howled through mountain passes and temperatures fell far below what flesh could bear. The castle did not rely on fire alone, but on the wisdom of generations who understood stone, earth, wood, and human breath as tools against the cold. As torchlight flickered against ancient stone corridors, stretched long and narrow, not by accident, but by design, where thick walls swallowed the cold and held the memory of warmth from the previous day's stone laid in layers trapped heat deep within its core, and released it slowly, like a sleeping hearth. Even when fires dimmed at night, the walls themselves breathed warmth back into chambers where nobles and servants alike, wrapped in wool and fur, moved through spaces shaped to resist winter, with low ceilings that kept heat close and doors heavy with iron bands that sealed drafts before they could steal warmth from the body. In the heart of the castle, the great hall glowed not brightly but steadily, where a central hearth burned day and night, fed by oak and beech wood stacked months in advance. The smoke did not simply escape, but traveled through hidden channels, warming walls, floors, and chambers above, before rising into the open sky. And as iron was forged in nearby workshops and bread baked in deep stone ovens, the heat of labor itself became part of the castle's lifeblood. With kitchens placed deliberately beneath living quarters, so warmth rose naturally through floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Fire and stone clothing became the second skin of survival, where linen lay closest to the body, trapping warmth from breath and movement. And above it, wool, thick, heavy, and unyielding, woven tightly to resist wind and damp, while fur-lined cloaks, collars, and boots, the scent of smoke and tallow, clinging to every fiber. And in bedchambers, straw mattresses layered with wool blankets and animal skins formed islands of heat where families slept close, sharing breath and body warmth. As the winter winds battered the outer walls of the castle's position on the land was chosen with care, nestled against hills or cliffs to break the force of icy gales, and surrounded by forests that fed both hearth and shelter, where daily life adjusted to the cold, with movement never stopping, hands always working, muscles always warm, and silence never complete as footsteps echoed. Iron rang, and fires whispered through the long nights. And in this frozen world, where darkness lingered and snow sealed the earth, medieval castles endured not through comfort, but through intelligence, resilience, and an intimate understanding of how to turn stone, fire, and human will into warmth against a merciless cold. As winter deepened and daylight shrank to a thin silver band along the horizon, the castle revealed its quieter secrets, where warmth was preserved not by spectacle, but by subtle choices, hidden in walls, floors, and routines passed from master to apprentice and mother to child. The silence of snow outside was answered by a living murmur within, as heat moved slowly like a patient tide through the stronghold, and every space was shaped to keep that tide from escaping. Deep beneath the castle floor, cellars stretched wide and low, carved into earth that never froze, where the ground itself offered protection against the killing cold. And in these spaces, food was stored, but heat was also guarded, for the earth held a steady temperature, even in the harshest winter, and this natural insulation softened the extremes of the season, allowing warmth to rise upward through stone foundations, while above, small windows set deep into walls admitted light, but denied the wind. Their narrow openings angled to trap sunlight when it appeared, and to scatter its warmth across interior stone throughout the day. Doors rarely stood open, and curtains heavy with wool or leather were hung across passageways to trap warmth like invisible walls. And as servants moved through the castle, they closed behind them every barrier, knowing that a single draft could undo hours of careful heating. And in the great Stairwells spiraling upward, the air grew warmer. The higher one climbed as heat gathered above, and was stored in upper chambers, reserved for sleeping and refuge during the coldest nights. Water itself became an ally against winter, where thick stone cisterns stored not only rain but warmth, absorbing heat from nearby hearths and releasing it slowly into surrounding rooms. And baths were heated not for luxury but for survival, where hot stones were lowered into tubs and steam-filled enclosed chambers, loosening frozen joints and restoring strength to bodies worn by labor and cold. And the scent of herbs hung heavy in the air, masking smoke and damp. Beyond architecture, the rhythm of life shifted with the season, where winter demanded closeness and shared space. Families gathered in communal rooms, telling stories, repairing tools, and mending clothes as the firelight danced across rough stone and timber beams. And in those moments, warmth came not only from flame, but from presence, from voices, laughter, and the steady sound of breathing as people leaned together against the night. Even animals played their role, stabled close to the castle walls, their body heat rising through stone floors and corridors above a living source of warmth that turned necessity into advantage. And in these months, the castle became less a fortress of war and more a shelter of survival, where every choice mattered and waste was unthinkable. As the wind screamed outside and frost clawed at towers, the castle endured through a balance of knowledge, restraint, and human connection, where warmth was guarded like treasure and the cold was not conquered but patiently outlasted. And in this quiet struggle between stone and winter, the medieval world revealed its greatest strength, not power or wealth, but the wisdom to survive when the world itself seemed frozen in silence, when the cold reached its cruelest depths, and the land beyond the walls lay frozen and lifeless. The castle relied on habits, shaped by centuries of endurance, where warmth was sustained not by abundance, but by discipline and awareness. And every person within the walls understood that survival depended on respect for firestone and time. The day began before sunrise, when embers still glowed faintly beneath ash, and hands moved carefully to awaken the hearth without letting precious heat escape into the air. Fire was never allowed to rage wildly, for excess heat meant wasted fuel and dangerous drafts. Instead, flames were kept low and constant, their steady breath warming iron grates, stones, and thick walls that absorbed and stored energy like memory. And when wood was scarce dried, dung, peat, and charcoal were added to maintain heat, with little smoke and long burn times filling chambers with a dry, penetrating warmth that settled deep into bone and muscle. Throughout the castle, movement followed the path of heat, where people worked in warmer spaces during the coldest hours and retreated to outer rooms only when the sun climbed high enough to lend its weak light. And in corridors, footsteps were slow, deliberate, so doors opened briefly and closed quickly, preserving the invisible shield that separated life from death outside. And even speech softened as breath itself carried warmth into the air. At night, the castle transformed into a world of shadows and glowing embers, where heavy shutters sealed windows and walls were lined with tapestries thick with woven scenes of hunts, saints, and battles, their beauty hiding a practical purpose as layers of fabric trapped warm air against stone and reduced the bite of cold that crept inward. And beds were drawn close to hearths or clustered together, where warmth pooled and was shared without hesitation. The castle kitchens remained alive long after sunset, where ovens radiated heat for hours after bread was baked, and stews simmered slowly through the night, releasing warmth and nourishment together. And the scent of barley, onions, and meat filled nearby halls, reinforcing the link between warmth and sustenance, where a full belly meant strength, and strength meant survival. Leaven, the human body, was treated as a source of heat, where labor was encouraged, not only for productivity, but for warmth. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and cooks worked through winter not to build, but to endure, their effort feeding the castle with both heat and purpose. And when the cold became unbearable, communal sleeping became common, where children, elders, and the weary lay together, wrapped in shared coverings, breathing as one living furnace outside. The walls, snow piled high against stone, but inside, the castle remained alive, with sound, with iron tools. Striking wood whispered prayers, crackling fire, and the low hum of human presence, and in this balance between restraint and resilience, medieval castles did not defy winter, they adapted to it, turning knowledge, routine, and shared humanity into a shield stronger than any wall, and in the deepest cold where the world seemed paused in ice, life endured, not through comfort, but through understanding, patience, and the quiet strength of people who refused to let the cold claim them. As winters stretched on, and the sun seemed reluctant to return, the castle revealed another layer of its silent resistance, where warmth was guarded through restraint and rhythm, and nothing was wasted, not a spark, not a breath, not a moment of daylight. The people within these walls learned to read the cold as one reads an enemy, understanding its patterns, its weaknesses, and its patience, and responding with equal care. Stone floors were covered with rushes, straw, and woven mats changed regularly to trap warmth beneath bare or booted feet, and to insulate bodies from the frozen ground beneath, and every step released the faint scent of dried herbs mixed with smoke and earth, a reminder that even comfort was crafted by hand and thought. And along the walls, benches and beds were raised from the floor, where cold gathered least and warmth lingered longest, turning height itself into protection. Light played a role as important as fire, where candles made from tallow, beeswax, or rendered fat burned slowly and close together, not to brighten vast halls, but to warm the air just enough to soften the bite of winter nights. And mirrors polished from metal reflected that small heat back inward, and in narrow chambers a single flame could raise the temperature enough to preserve life and morale. The castle's daily rhythm bent to the cold, where work began late and ended early to conserve strength. Meals were heavier, richer, in fats and grains, designed to feed the inner fire of the body, and ale and broth were served warm, not merely for comfort, but to keep blood moving and joints alive. And even silence was used carefully, where doors were padded and footsteps measured to avoid stirring cold air that settled like a living thing in unused space. Children learned early how to survive winter, not through instruction, but observation, watching elders seal shutters, stack wood, layer clothing, and gather clothes as stories filled the evenings. Tales of long winters survived, and harsher ones endured, and these stories carried warmth of their own, binding memory to survival and turning fear into patience in the deepest nights, when storms howled and snow pressed against the walls. Like a siege, the castle became a single breathing organism, where every life depended on the others, where warmth was shared, guarded, and replenished through effort and unity, and no one stood alone against the cold. And in those moments, the castle was no longer stone and timber, but a living refuge, shaped by centuries of human endurance. And so while the world outside lay frozen, silent, and unforgiving, medieval castles endured, not because they conquered winter, but because they respected it, learning to live within its grip and bend without breaking. And in this quiet triumph of survival, warmth was not simply felt, it was earned, preserved, and passed forward like a flame that refused to die even at the edge of a frozen world. When the long winter finally loosened its grip, and the light returned slowly to the sky, the castle stood unchanged against the thaw, a testament to months of endurance, where warmth had been guarded not by miracle, but by memory, knowledge, and shared resolve. And as snow melted from battlements, and water ran once more through frozen channels, the people within the walls carried forward the lessons learned in darkness and cold. The stone that had absorbed heat through endless nights now released it gently as the air softened, and halls once sealed against the wind opened cautiously to the outside world. And the scent of damp earth replaced smoke and tallow in the corridors, yet the habits of winter remained embedded in daily life, where fires were still tended with care, and walls still respected as allies rather than obstacles. In this continuity, was the true strength of the medieval castle, not its towers or weapons, but its ability to preserve life through understanding. Looking back across the centuries, these castles speak not of luxury, but of resilience, where survival at 40 degrees below freezing was achieved through intelligence, patience, and cooperation, rather than comfort or excess, and every stone beam, hearth, and habit carried purpose, shaped by experience, passed from generation to generation, and refined through hardship. And in this system, warmth was not a single source, but a network of choices, woven together like the tapestries that once lined the walls. The silence of winter nights, the crackle of hearths, the low murmur of shared stories, the weight of wool and fur against skin, the slow rhythm of life adjusted to the cold, all formed a language of survival, spoken fluently by those who lived within these walls. And though electricity would one day banish darkness and cold from human homes, the wisdom of these medieval fortresses remains a reminder that technology is only one path to endurance, and understanding is another. As dawn breaks over ruined castles today, their stones still hold echoes of warmth long gone, and when winter winds pass through empty halls, they whisper of fires once tended and lives once lived close together against the cold, and in that whisper lies the final truth of medieval survival, that warmth was never merely about heat, but about community foresight and the quiet refusal to surrender to the cruelty of nature. And so these castles stand even now as monuments not just of war or power, but of human adaptability, where at the edge of a frozen world, people learned how to stay alive with nothing but stone, fire, and each other. And in that enduring lesson, the medieval past reaches forward, reminding us that resilience is built slowly, carefully, and together, and that even in the deepest cold, warmth can endure when knowledge and humanity burn side by side.